Hi, this is Kip Mock, host of The Cut and the Dry. I'm here with my co-host, Isaac Lopez, founder of The Life Given Radio. We're here to talk to you guys tonight about the first presidential debate. I know we're a little late to the show, but we kind of had this idea last minute. So we're just going to jump straight into it. And the first thing I wanted to talk about was Trump's alleged refusal to condemn white supremacy in the debate.
Nice.
So I've got a few headlines here. The first is, quote, Trump declines to denounce white supremacy, end quote, from NPR. Then, quote, editorial, President blew chance to reject white supremacy, unquote, from the Columbus Dispatch. Next one, quote, Trump condemns all white supremacists after refusing to do so at the presidential debate, unquote, from yours truly, CNN. Next, quote, Trump's refusal to condemn white supremacy fits pattern of extremist rhetoric, unquote, and that's from The Guardian. Next one, quote, Trump's failure to condemn white supremacy at debate, part of well-established pattern, unquote, ABC News. Next one, quote, Trump refuses to denounce white supremacy in chaotic debate, unquote, New York Times. Now, before we talk about this a little bit, I want to go to the transcript, and I'll give you timestamps, so if you want to reference this, you're more than welcome to. Timestamps in here if you guys want to listen to this yourselves. Chris Wallace says, quote, you have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not to add to the violence in a number of these cities as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland, unquote. So at 41 minutes and 57 seconds, President Donald Trump says, sure, I'm willing to do that, unquote. So all of those headlines I read earlier are demonstrably false. And there are a couple other things that are misleading about these headlines that I'd like to discuss later. But Isaac, what are your thoughts on this? You've watched the debate a few times, so
Yeah. I think one of the things that they really hopped on was the fact that he said to, like, with that quote that you just cited, and then he says to stand down and stand by,
right,
which wasn't like their perfect idea of
exactly.
Like he didn't come out and denounce it. And my thought was, we just saw two men debating. You know, they're over 75 years old, both of them, and both Joe Biden and Donald Trump had multiple misspeaks, if you want to say. So, multiple times on the fly, if you're talking fast in a high-pressure situation like that, you're going to say stuff that may not be as clear as you would like it to be. And I think in this instance, the media is always chasing after Trump as he's a racist. Referring to that one incident back in Charlotte, right in South Carolina, where there's that one incident, and I think Wallace mentioned that in, the debate as well, and they just want to color him as a racist, when if you listen to and read the transcripts, he clearly defines it as, no, I'm not a white supremacist. Actually, he condemned them as Ku Klux Klan, and Joe Biden, I think, went to didn't he go to the funeral of one of the Ku Klux Klan's leaders?
I haven't heard about this, actually.
Yeah.
But, Richard Spencer, a famous white supremacist, recently, he endorsed Trump in 2016, but he actually switched his endorsement to endorsing Joe Biden.
Oh, I did not know this.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
But there are a couple things that you mentioned that I want to pick up on, because I did put in a little bit more of the transcript.
Okay.
But I'd actually like to go back to Chris Wallace's first quote, because it's easy to miss this, but it's a very leading question. He says, basically, he's asking Trump to condemn white supremacists, ask them to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland. So right there, Chris Wallace he's loading the question with the assumption that what happened in Kenosha and what happened in Portland is white supremacy. So I assume he's referring to Kyle Rittenhouse in terms of Kenosha. As for Portland, I don't know exactly what he's referring to. I know there has been violence on both sides, but what's been more prominent is the fact that a guy who was wearing a MAGA hat was targeted and murdered first-degree murder. It was premeditated. There's
Right.
record of people discussing this online. And so Chris Wallace is kind of just glossing over the violence. I mean, I know I'm all over the map here, but for Kyle Rittenhouse, there was one of the guys that he shot, the one who survived, was holding a pistol to his head when he was shot in the arm. Right? So hopefully the courts will find the truth, and I'm hoping that they'll find that it was self-defense, because from all the evidence we have, that's what was the case. But a really, really loaded question from Chris Wallace. He was obviously super biased in the debate. I honestly, I don't know much about Chris Wallace. I don't really watch the news. So I wasn't expecting that. All I knew was he was a Fox News anchor. And so I was like, wow, that was pretty crazy.
Yeah, and I was actually going to jump in and ask what you thought overall of his job as a moderator, because I don't think Chris Wallace, I've watched him interview Trump. I think it was close after President's Day, or it was after 4th of July, after his speech at Mount Rushmore. And Chris Wallace had an interview with him, and he was pretty head on with President Trump, and very, very much confrontational, even though he's in the Fox News camp. But anyway, coming back to the question, what did you think overall of Chris Wallace as a moderator? And I hope this isn't getting too far away from
no,
what you
not
compared,
at all. I mean, this is just a conversation starter. So, he was interesting. So, obviously, I have to recognize the fact that I'm biased as well.
Right.
I support President Trump. I'm voting for him. I'm excited to vote for him, and I have no qualms about voting for him. And I'm also not a racist. It's not a joke. That's actually a serious statement.
It needs to be said, because everyone's going to assume that you're a racist because you're a President Trump supporter.
Exactly. Same here. Exactly. So with that bias in mind, there were a couple points in the debate. It was so fast paced, and the only accurate statement, I think, from these headlines I read earlier was the fact that the New York Times mentioned it was a chaotic debate. It definitely was a chaotic debate.
Yeah.
I'll get to that later. But there was so much going on. But if you look back to the transcript and you look back at some of Chris Wallace's questions, you see a lot of stuff like this. He's got a lot of leading questions with a lot of big assumptions nestled into them, and it's not easy to pick up on that during the debate. But I think President Trump did a good job of trying to answer questions reasonably, while also recognizing that Chris Wallace wasn't being a moderator. He was. President Trump called him out. He said, "I thought I thought I was debating Joe Biden. But apparently, this is 1v2. But that's okay.
That was just 15 minutes into the debate.
Yeah. And he saw it, and it took me a little longer to really pick up on a lot of the things that Chris Wallace was doing. In terms of the basic role of a moderator, he didn't do a terrible job.
Okay.
He tried to keep things on track, but the manner in which he wrote his questions and the manner in which he tried to lead the witness was very misleading, and I think it was pretty shameful. So I think President Trump was right. He was debating both of them, and Chris Wallace was a more formidable opponent.
And younger.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's one thing I have to Google this every time I think about it, because I don't believe it, but President Trump is only 3 years younger than Joe Biden.
I thought it was 10 years.
I know.
Honestly.
It doesn't seem possible. The poor man, Joe Biden, really shouldn't be running for president.
Right. Okay. Also, I need to retract my statement. Chris Wallace is apparently 73 years old.
Oh, really?
So he is younger technically than the other two, but he looks a lot younger.
He's been dyed the hairs.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Probably taking a leaf out of Trump's book. But.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, let's see. Do you have any questions? You have any thoughts? You want to kick us off with something?
Yeah. I just kind of general feedback. I wasn't the first listen through. I wasn't able to watch it live, so I listened to it the next day at work, and I didn't get. I did see all my friends' reactions on Facebook, right and left side of the aisle. And I was like, oh, this is going to be good. And not in a, like, uplifting way. I wasn't excited. You know, I wasn't
you just
like...
thought, oh, this is going to be a juicy
Yeah,
one.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. You know, going into it, honestly, I didn't really think President Trump was going to lose. Trump is just far more active and agile mentally than Joe Biden is, and I think we've seen that in a plethora of interviews.
Yeah.
And I want to say it almost goes without saying, but what were you going to say?
Well, I just want to jump in there, but Joe Biden was a lot more coherent than I was expecting. I know there are a lot of people speculating about him being on drugs to like enhance his performance. I don't even know if that's a thing.
Yeah,
if the man has dementia or he's senile or whatever his ailment may be, I don't know if there are drugs that can make you more coherent. I don't really think it's worth talking about that, but I just thought it's important to note he was a lot more coherent than I had anticipated.
Yeah,
he did a decent job. I mean, he was lying right, left, and center.
Right.
And that's not to say that everything that President Trump said was true. We're not going to do any fact checking on this show. That
we don't have the time to do that.
Yeah, we don't have the time. But just in terms of lying all over the place, Joe Biden was doing it, but he did hold himself together. He
did, and I think when it comes to these debates, and that kind of goes back to after seeing all the reactions on Facebook, this is going to be a terrible debate. I listened to it, and honestly, I think I got a headache the first time listening to it because there's so much back and forth. Honestly, I think Trump, and I have this in kind of like my general takeaways. I thought if Trump had kind of let this one get away from him because it was his to win. If he just kind of shut up every now and then, Joe Biden would have dug himself a hole. I thought Trump was kind of getting away from the main issues that he was going to dominate at. I mean, how does Biden get off being able to say with a straight face that this is Trump's fault and that his economy sucked? It's like actually Trump's economy is the best economy we've seen in years until Trump happened in 2020, until COVID and Trump had to lock everything down, right?
Yeah.
He statistically just had a great economy running for the U.S. and Biden is trying to take credit for that and take
and
point
he's
that
recovered
toward Obama.
52 million of the jobs lost.
Yeah, unemployment is down to 8% last time I heard.
And it was
might be even lower than that, maybe.
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it's very impressive how quickly he's managed to pull things together. The stock market's back to better than it ever was during the Obama administration already.
Right.
I do agree. I think it's hard to say because it's easy for us to sit back here and say, man, he could have just swept the floor with Joe Biden. But again, we're going to be editing this podcast. It's easy for us to cover up mistakes. It's easy for us to sound like we're on the tips of our feet.
Right.
That's not even like us.
We do have to leave that in.
We're going to have to leave that in. Okay. You see my point, though.
Like, to be fair, Kip has been traveling all day to get back here, and this was very last minute. We thought we were doing this Thursday at lunch, and then he messaged me yesterday, and he's like, "Hey, let's do it Wednesday night." So he really has not had time to gather everything.
I mean,
in all fairness,
the bottom line is though that it's easy to say, man, I wish he had just done this or that or thus and such. It's really difficult to be 3.5 times our age and still be that on top of things on stage. I think he did a really decent job. The one thing, if anybody listening to this hasn't watched the presidential debate, has been avoiding it just because they saw all of the reactions on Facebook and Twitter, etc., I would recommend just reading the transcript. I think that's a better way to digest it because I did watch it live, but I didn't want to watch it again. I couldn't watch it again. So I read through the transcript, and that was a much better way to digest it.
Okay.
And I think it really shows a little bit more,
like we talked about just a little while ago, how Chris Wallace was loading the questions in favor of Joe Biden, and it really highlights those things in a manner in which you can really process it. So I think that's definitely worth it for anybody interested in looking more into this before the next debate or whatever the case may be. Maybe you just wait for the transcript of the next one. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. But I guess I kind of interrupted you there. So
yeah, well, I was monologuing too long, so I'm glad you cut me off. But basically, I like that's kind of where I was going with it. I listened to it a second time today in preparation for this, and I gleaned a lot more from it because I was ready for how barbed both debaters were. It's American politics, like. There's going to be plenty of mudslinging involved. So if you have your mind in that kind of like, okay, I'm just going to grit through that and look for the policies and what are they actually arguing and pushing about. I really liked their discussion about the Supreme Court when it came down to Justice Amy Coney Barrett. I love her nomination. I mean, the more
Huge
digging
fan.
I do on her in her career, she is just going to be such a great addition to it, and also I think a win for the pro-life camp. I don't see how you can look at her family of 7 and she's written multiple things that actually go in favor for pro-life, and that's more than we can say of John Roberts. So
absolutely.
But basically, I mean, my just kind of overall thoughts is that I wasn't even on the second go through. I think that if Trump had stayed away from Hunter Biden and, kind of mudslinging with that, I think that he can win on, they discussed the 6 topics were the Supreme Court, coronavirus pandemic, the economy, race, and violence in cities, and the integrity of the election. He should, knock all of those out of the park, and really he's talking to his camp, right? He's talking to his base.
Yeah.
And if he really focused on those issues, he could steamroll both, Biden and Wallace.
Yeah.
But that was probably my general complaint when it came to Trump.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that.
Yeah, go for it.
The first thought I have is people like us being pro-Trump are a minority in terms of Trump supporters, I would say. That's not, and I don't want to imply that the majority of Trump supporters even are hillbillies who always have some dip in their lip and are named Cletus. But Trump does cater to that crowd in a sense. And the mudslinging is a very effective way to get those people amped up.
Okay.
Now, people like us, we see, I don't want to sound arrogant, but there are, I think, a couple distinct classes of Trump supporters. There are people who are just tired of everything that's been going on in the government.
Right.
And they're grateful that Trump is nominating conservative judges. It's a huge deal. They're grateful for what he's done to the economy.
Right.
They're grateful for the regulations he's been cutting, and they see everything he's doing, and they're glad about it.
Right.
But I think there is also a class that just enjoys how belligerent Trump is, and they might not understand to. Basically, they're just out there in their Dodge truck. I'm sorry.
This is going downhill fast, but no, I get what you're saying. I mean, there are two different kinds of Trump supporters, and one's more redneck than the other.
Right.
And this is a callback to Western Texas kind of America that's going to come and punch you in the mouth if you if you go against football, flag, and family.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you're getting at, and I think it's a good analysis.
But so my second thought though. Thank you for pulling me out of that hole I was digging for myself. About to get shot by somebody driving a truck.
Biden. That's just what happened there.
Oof. That hurts. I forgot what my... No, I'm just kidding. My other thought is kind of going off track a little bit, but still on the topic of your question. I think a lot of people have kind of lost sight of history, and I've seen so many people say we've never had such an unpresidential president.
Right.
We've nothing's ever happened like this in politics. I mean, come on. Like, Caesar got stabbed by 15 dudes in his palace. Like, stuff's been nasty for a long time.
Wait, there is a time before the U.S.? Is that what you're telling me?
What? Yes. Rome's just a joke. I made that up. That never happened. But I mean, I can point to so many examples. I'm not thinking of any off the top of my head, but I mean, Henry VIII beheaded a bunch of his wives because he didn't get a son. He was triggered.
Right.
Politics has never been pretty, and just because we've been spoiled for the last 250 years, politics isn't meant to be a pretty game.
Right.
Right, and that's not to say that it can't be redeemed by Christ's blood, just as everything else can. But looking at the state of the rest of our country, I don't think it's the hill that we need to be dying on right now. I don't think we need to be bothered by Trump's mudslinging and belligerent antics, because he gets the job done, and that's what matters.
Right.
And so I think it's easy to get caught up in that kind of stuff, and it's understandable. Like, if you look back to Reagan, you're like, man, just wish you could have the poise of Reagan. Have you ever seen that one speech? It was like a couple weeks after Reagan got shot. Yes. And he was giving another speech, and a balloon popped or something. And, like, without even flinching, he's like, "Miss me," and then keeps going with his speech. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But the man had a level of dignity and poise that Donald Trump doesn't have. Yeah. And it's easy to get caught up in that. It's easy to get frustrated about it. But I don't think it's worth the time to do so. So I guess that's my second thought on that. But it's a valid point. Sorry, I'm not trying to shut you up. But I guess that's just my take on that.
That definitely is something that I reflect on almost any time President Trump either tweets or he is in a debate. Because he can sound very presidential when he wants to. His COVID videos,
really good prepared speech.
Exactly.
He sounds incredible. Yeah, he had some amazing speeches.
Yeah. And so my only one of the biggest questions that I always wrestle with when it comes to Trump and looking at the last 4 years is how much I don't think that he has polarized the U.S. like the media has pitched to us all these years, right? Yeah. I think the media has had, 80% of that is their fault. But they have been able, Trump gives them enough to work with that it's believable to a certain extent, right?
Exactly.
So Trump is definitely not Reagan. He's not a George Washington, and all those men, both of those men had backbones, right? And I'm not saying that Trump doesn't have a backbone. I'm just saying that Trump can be very outrageous is such a overused term, but the word's not coming to me right now.
I know what you're saying, though, because he can be that way. His Twitter feed, I'm not saying flinching at some of his tweets isn't a reasonable reaction.
Right.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying I don't think it's a point that's worth belaboring.
Okay.
But it's totally valid. That doesn't mean it's not valid. And I think you're also correct in the fact that he feeds the media just enough that some of their complaints have just this tinge of validity, but every lie has a tinge of truth.
Right.
Every good lie does. But at the core of it, Trump feeds them enough to make themselves look stupid. Is the bottom line? Because then you end up with headlines like this, where people are saying he refuses to condemn white supremacy, when if you read the transcript, that's not true. And so I don't know if he does this intentionally, but he carries himself in such a manner that he feeds them just enough that they can have a little bit of truth and then just absolutely go shoot themselves in the foot.
Right.
And so maybe he doesn't do it intentionally, but it's really interesting to watch. For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So the question that we finally got to for my question that I've been trying to get to,
wow.
but it's taken unearthing. So I'm not saying that we've taken a loop to it. You've helped me refine it. But is Trump's attitude, the way that he communicates, do you think that's chasing away voters? If there are any left in the on the fence, do you think those are just kind of shooing them away? Is it enough to chase the middle ground voters away?
I honestly, maybe a few.
Okay.
But I don't think that it's going to tank him.
Right.
I think there could be some people. I hesitate to say no. I don't think he's driving away any voters by doing this, because it's probably the case that he did. There are probably a couple thousand people in the U.S. that were going to vote for Trump who are now going to vote third party. Maybe more, maybe tens of thousands. But in my limited scope of friends, most of them are conservative.
Right.
A lot of them are leaning towards third party. And I haven't run into anybody who was voting for Trump and is now voting third party. I have seen some people say the debate confirmed in my mind that I need to vote third party.
Right.
But and I guess maybe that defines your category of people who are on the fence.
Right. Yeah.
But I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay. Yeah.
I think there are going to be a decent number more people voting third party this year normal. But that's been a trend recently. There more and more people are voting third party.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a large push. Actually, and this is just a plug for the Life Giving News. Luke Mason just did an article on devoter.us. And that's a movement there in the third party. Almost like that third party, but it's giving you an option to not vote, but making use of that, which I found strategic. I don't agree with it. That's not something I'm going to do. I have been decided that I'm voting Trump, like, with each passing year of his candidacy. 2020 has been a nutty year, and I think he could have done better in some areas.
Sure.
But that has not swayed my vote. Like, I think this is a really important moment for U.S. But
same
anyway.
here. I totally agree with you. But yeah, I mean, if you are solidly third party and you don't care about President Trump, go check out devoter.us.
Yes.
It's a really, really cool concept. If I had any doubts about voting for President Trump, I would think about it, but I don't. So here we are.
We're good.
Yeah. So there's one last thought that I want to touch on. I know we were just talking about devoter.us, but the main reason I'm not on board with that concept is that I think that voting idealism needs to die, especially in 2020. I've heard this explained.
Sorry, it's sinking in with me. Man, that's a swing. All right, go for it. That's a right hook to a lot of people, and probably a lot of people who will listen to this. So, all right, this is gonna be good.
Okay, well, maybe I should have prepared for this more. Oh dear, you hyped this up a little too much. Sorry. Well, I've heard this explained in a couple different ways, but one of them is, voting isn't sending a Valentine. It's not saying you're in love with this person.
Right.
Like Trump isn't a perfect man, and I've also heard a lot of people say, you can't vote for Trump because he's not led a perfect life. Thank God that he doesn't have the same standard for you. Yep. You know, and that's not to say that Trump hasn't committed more serious sins than lots of us have, but that doesn't matter. You break one pane, you break the whole window.
Right.
And that's just how it is. So, voting isn't a Valentine. You're not voting for the love of your life. You're voting for who's going to take the country in the direction you want it to go.
Right.
And just a couple days ago, Pastor Wilson here in Moscow, he wrote a blog post about this, and I think he summed it up really well. And he said that voting has become a secular sacrament. And I think Christians have kind of fallen prey to this idea of you need to be 100% invested in the candidate you're voting for. Otherwise, you're doing something wrong.
Right.
And I don't think that's the case. It's not a sacrament. It's not. You're not baptizing your baby.
Oh, thank goodness.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not taking communion. You're saying, this is the direction I want our country to go. I don't want it to go that way.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, Jo Jorgensen, the main third party candidate, has explicitly said that she's not anti-abortion.
Right.
She's pro-choice.
Right.
She's libertarian to the point where she doesn't want to regulate murder.
Right.
You know? So the main third party candidate, the only one who's even going to get more than 1 million votes, is pro-choice.
Right.
So who are you going to be voting for? You are going to be voting for somebody if you are voting on an idealist platform of I am 100% invested in this candidate. And I have to admit, I voted for Ben Carson in 2016 for this reason. Because Ben Carson was a solid man, is a solid man.
Yeah.
He would have made a terrible president. And I realize that now. But I was 100% on board, and I am 100% on board with the kind of man that he is.
Right.
And so I voted for him. But through Donald Trump's presidency, I've really learned that, well, this president is getting us results in the direction that we want to go.
Right.
And a lot of these people who are idealists, President Trump is going in the direction they want to go.
Right.
But he's making compromises to get results.
Right.
You know, he's not doing everything I want him to do, but he's doing everything that I think he can do.
Yeah.
And so that's my main pitch. Voting idealism, I think, needs to die. Need to give up on it. It's not a sacrament. It's not your salvation.
Right.
It's do you want our country to maintain freedom, or do you want socialism? Yeah, pick one.
Right.
That's my take on it. So, yeah, that's kind of my closing thought. Do you have any response to that? Any ideas?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that was a clean right hook. Nicely done.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to hearing the responses to our friends, because that's probably who's going to listen to this first.
Right.
Luke Mason called you out.
Yeah, and he's on this project as well, so he will probably chase us down. But my thought is, I would probably say amen to all that. I've definitely come to that realization that voting night, you can get really bogged down and confused if you try to get get a happy answer, right? If you look at really any complicated issue, sometimes for your conscience and for you to be able to sleep at night, you need to find the most important one to you and figure out, okay, how do I make the best of this situation, right?
Yeah.
So look at lockdowns, look at the mask debate, just how much we're in this war right now that's going on culturally. My wife and I have talked about we need to just figure out one thing, because when it comes to wearing masks, in private businesses, or do you want to wear a mask because maybe it's not a good Christian witness if you aren't wearing a mask out in public,
Right.
all of those things. But for us, we decided, we're not going to wear masks in these settings because we think that it's an invasion, that's a government overreach. And that's the reason why we're pushing back. And there are 1,000 reasons otherwise to do or to not do. And so when it comes to voting in this presidential election, I'm thinking, okay, right now we're just at the basic building blocks of life in a country. Right, we're haggling over a child's life. Like when does a child's life begin? For us, it's very simple.
Right,
and for me, that's the main issue, because if our culture is confused over that, then I'm not going to be able to make any headway if I don't correct that simple definition.
Exactly.
Right? And because that's such a pivotal thing that we're all arguing around. But a lot of people are going over to Biden because, well, he's kinder. He's more compassionate. Well, he sounds more compassionate, but I don't think he's compassionate if he's killing babies.
Exactly.
Like that, to me, that's convicting me to vote for Trump.
Right.
I don't like the guy. I mean, he's had affairs. He's cheating on his wife. He's not an upstanding man.
Yeah.
But he's doing some good stuff. That I think the kingdom of God can really benefit from having him in office.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, I'm going to vote for him.
Yeah.
And I haven't been swayed, and I think that would be the thing that I would tell other people if they asked me for my opinion on that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I don't know.
Well, let me close it off with
a
a couple more thoughts, kind of bouncing off of what you just said. The first is just something I've noticed that I found really intriguing about President Trump, and I think this is a good indicator of at least where he's at now. Not necessarily where he's been. We all know that he's done lots of terrible things.
Right.
But in terms of where he's at now and what he's doing now, it's really interesting to see his kids, Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump. His kids are pulling for him. His kids are there for him.
Right.
And you can't really say that about a lot of politicians. And it says a lot about, I think, about his character, honestly, that his kids are still there for him. Because thinking about all of the things that have been said about what President Trump has done in the past, it seems unlikely that his kids would still be there. I'm not saying the accusations against him are untrue or true, because they don't really affect my vote. But a piece of information that I found valuable to note is that his kids are still there for him. And I think that's really cool. And I think that's a good indicator of hopefully an increase in quality of character in him. So that's one just note of encouragement for anybody that I've kind of noticed. And the last piece of encouragement is thank God that our president is not the Messiah.
Yes.
Because all of this considered, we've sat down here to talk about the presidential debate, and it's a valuable thing to talk about, and I think it's important that Christians are involved in voicing their opinions in the political sphere. But at the same time, the only thing that you'll ever do that's going to last forever is making babies. So
Yeah.
make babies, raise them well, and grow the kingdom that way, and everything else will sort itself out. That's really all that matters. So, but also go vote for Trump.
Have your kids vote for Trump. I mean, it's mail-in. They won't know the difference. Right?
But yeah, kind of just a little side note.
Yeah.
Because it's a little bit sad once you kind of just get rambling on about politics and
Totally.
news and lies and all this, and so I just wanted to throw in a couple happy things
Yeah.
there at the end.
No,
So
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Just like to prime people for the next debate. That's October 15th. It's gonna.
Yeah.
I mean, you can find it on CBS, ABC, CNN. There's so many streams on YouTube. You can find. That's where I watched it. And then the moderator for that. I just had it here. Is Steve Scully. He's a C-SPAN political editor. So maybe if you want to scout ahead,
Yeah.
I probably will. I'll probably go watch a couple of his things in preparation for our next analysis. But that's all I got. If you
Awesome.
have,
well, this is Kip and Isaac signing off for now. We'll see you guys pretty soon.